Welcome to this week's Bitshares Dev Hangout. This recording is brought to you by the Beyond Bitcoin crew. We welcome all Bitshares members to join us weekly and discuss the latest news, updates, and developments. If you'd like to participate in our next meeting, then please join us live on Mumble every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Did you know the Beyond Bitcoin show now has a registered delegate? Please consider voting if you find our hangouts and recordings useful. The delegate name to vote for is fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. Again, that's fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. The Beyond Bitcoin crew would like to send out a big thank you to everyone who's already voted and allowing us the opportunity to serve the Bitshares ecosystem and our valued community members. So once again, welcome and please enjoy the show.
Welcome to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout. Today is Friday, March 27th, 2015. Our next Hangout is going to be an especially interesting one. Now, if there were a byte master of the Bitshares Music project, Taulant would be it. Not only does he lead the team constructing Bitshares Music and peer tracks, but he and his team at Bitsapphire are also hard at work on the Moonstone.io Light Wallet. Taulant joins us today, one day before the Texas Bitcoin Conference, to talk about Bitshares Music as a project and why Bitshares Music's native token, the Note, is being made tradable on the Bitshares flagship decentralized exchange before the Bitshares Music blockchain even emerges. Not only is Taulant a talented developer and project lead, but he also has a knack for simplifying complex topics into terms understandable by the layman. I always personally enjoy chatting with Taulant, and I'm certain you will too. So with that said, let's go ahead and see what Taulant has to say.
If anybody has any questions regarding the notes, I've been made aware from Taulant a couple days ago that they were going to be trading on the Bitshares chain itself initially. Would you like to talk a little bit about that and kind of give us the general rundown with respect to that stuff?
Yeah. So I'll disclose everything about how we just made the tokens liquid and how we're planning to go forward from this point on. I can't disclose everything at this point, though. Peer tracks and a lot of the plans about Bitshares Music will be, presented at the Texas Bitcoin Conference tomorrow. So if anybody's there, just drop in. I hope you can.
Sounds cool. So you're going to give us kind of the inside peek before the conference.
Yeah, just about the top at this point.
Sure.
So you've probably seen that you got the note now in your wallet. And the whole idea was that while working with everybody in the industry and talking to them and seeing what their needs are, and seeing where blockchain tech is going and DPoS is going, we decided to, as soon as possible, make the tokens themselves liquid. So, we can finally, trade the tokens and people can get in and out of it as they wish. We don't like the approach where you kind of almost hold the tokens themselves hostage and the market itself hostage. Let's just make it as liquid, as transparent as possible. We did that for several reasons on the Bitshares blockchain itself, because we absolutely love the exchange itself on the blockchain. It's the fastest, it works the best, we're already familiar with it. All our stakeholders are already on it. We hope everybody agrees with us. If not, we'd love your opinion on our approach and what we've done. So the idea about making them liquid is that we send the tokens to all the public keys that participated in the crowdfunder, because most of the people who participated reused the same public key, or many of the people reused the same public key. They participated also in the AGS rounds. That means that most people who did that and imported their keys into the Bitshares wallet also see now the notes in their wallet, which is a nice, user experience to have. Now, anybody who starts getting the tokens will be able, once the actual music blockchain is out, to just export their Bitshares public-private key pairs, import them into the music wallet / interface. And then you'll have access to everything that happened in that second snapshot on Bitshares itself. Are there any questions about that? Anything you'd like to understand more?
So you're saying that if somebody has already imported their keys into the Bitshares blockchain to receive their Bitshares from like AGS or PTS, then the notes will show up automatically?
If they use the same key pair for both the AGS fundraiser and the music fundraiser. And considering that everybody who participated in the AGS fundraiser has also staked in the music blockchain, everybody has at least a fraction of, some music shares now in their wallet.
That's awesome. Have you seen a lot of trading, and have you seen maybe, or do you think that kind of some of the bugs that the one bug that crept up in the market engine earlier this week, has that caused any problems that you've seen as far as in terms of the notes?
That market engine is only important for shorting and longing, and therefore only for bid assets. Any user-issued assets are not affected.
Okay, so it's safe for them to trade, and it was safe for them to trade even before the bug was fixed, essentially.
Absolutely.
Okay, there have been some questions that have been asked to me regarding, is Taulant going to be part of, is he part of PeerTrax? Is he part of music, Bitshares Music? Can you kind of give people who are kind of new to the community and who might be listening to these Hangouts for the first time, kind of an idea of what exactly your position is and where you guys stand in terms of what the difference between PeerTrax and music is?
Yeah, so Sapphire, our tagline is "We build crypto startups." You can think of us as crypto-only agency specializing now in Bitcoin and Bitshares. But instead of just getting paid and then running, doing the work and then running for it, what we do is we partner very closely with all the startups we work with. So essentially, we provide the technical team to their business development and marketing and connections, right? Which Lee and Cedric have done a phenomenal job at, by the way. And we concentrate fully on the technical side of things. Now, this is a really, close partnership at this point, and it's probably just going to get more and more closer. So we sometimes like to tell people that we're like a remote accelerator, because we also help all the startups with connections with one another. More often than not, startups, get in touch with us. They don't really know what to expect, and then we tell them, we're not really a match, but we have these other 2 or 3 partners that you might want to talk to, and later you see a synergy evolve and the partnership evolve out of that. And we like to position ourselves that way in the middle of the industry. That's probably the most direct answer here. About the relationship between PeerTrax and music. Music is a blockchain. PeerTrax is the initial interface and application that uses exclusively the music blockchain, right? It's just like, imagine if the Bitcoin blockchain got out there without the wallet. In this case, it essentially means you can have the best music blockchain out there, but if you don't have a music, streaming, listening, voting, buying, etc. interface, it's pretty much useless. And that's what PeerTrax provides, and it is a separate company specializing just in that, and it connects up to the music blockchain. Now, we are developing currently both, so both the blockchain and the interface. The interface just got done for the MVP and for the presentation for tomorrow. So anybody in Texas can see that, and I hope there's going to be some recordings for the community. And the music blockchain is in the works. Obviously, building a blockchain is a lot more complicated than building a even relatively complex web application. That's why PeerTrax got done before the blockchain. And that's why we wanted to make the token liquid when the interface that sits on top of it, the kind of the MVP, the minimum viable product, comes out, so people can make their minds up and say, I want to be part of this, or I don't want to be part of this.
Sure. So you're giving people the ability early on to start participating in music before the blockchain is even necessarily out, utilizing the decentralized exchange.
Absolutely.
Speaking of decentralized exchange versus centralized exchange, there are some questions that have been asked in terms of the music snapshot on Bitter or BTER. I don't know how it's pronounced. I guess everybody can pronounce it whatever way they want. Do you know anything about how that's being handled? Have you been in contact with Bitter at all, or do you know of anybody from the team who has been in contact with Bitter?
Cedric has been in contact with all the exchanges. At Sapphire, we deal exclusively with the technical side of things, and really, just knock on Cedric's door, and I think he should be now in his hotel in Texas.
So you're not quite sure we need to hunt down Cobb for this answer?
You would need to do that, yes.
Sounds good.
Could give you an answer, but I don't want to be wrong about this, on the call.
Sure. I mean, that's fair enough. In terms of Moonstone, is Moonstone going to be integrating anything like Pure Tracks, or are those going to be completely separate? How's that going to work?
Pure Tracks is going to integrate with Moonstone as a separate wallet service. And so all the exchanging, payment, and trading of the tokens themselves will happen in a specific Moonstone view. So we're building the Moonstone in such a way that different DAGs can have specific views what they need. So for example, it's highly unlikely that you will have, at least for the average user, you'll have 200 different bond tokens in the future in your wallet at any point in time. However, it's more than likely that you'll have 100, 200, maybe even 1,000 artist tokens, but that requires a different interface. And we're building it in such a way that for specific future projects, such as music or play or the SKU chain or any other DPoS-related blockchain, can be a specific interface, just like a plugin in the menu. And that's how it's going to integrate with them. However, that cost, just to make sure everybody understands, cost of integrating with PTRAX and the specific use for PTRAX is going to be paid and done everything by PTRAX itself. This is not going to be financed through the crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding campaign just releases Moonstone under the MIT license.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And JRan here is asking, number one, can we get a public development roadmap and a rough release schedule for Bitshares Music?
For version 1, I'm pretty sure we can give that, but for version 2 and 3, as you've probably seen with Bitshares itself, there is more R&D. When you look at R&D, with blockchains, there's always more R than D. If it was just development, it would be pretty easy. For version 1, it's primarily development rather than research. And therefore, the release of version 1 of the blockchain is going to be publicly disclosed with a roadmap and timeline sooner rather than later. Suppose over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll make a disclosure about that. Sure.
So, and this is, I'm just going to jump in for a moment and kind of give a little bit of context to what you mean by that, Itnam. And please stop me where if I am incorrect in anything that I say. Over the course of time, we've realized, at least in the Bitshares community, that hard deadlines are pretty hard to keep. And it seems like this is the case. Generally, if anybody is a Blizzard fan out there, they might have experienced some similar growing pains in terms of software development and release dates. There are many times when a very high quality game and its release date or its early, its scheduled release date is pushed back. And sometimes it's pushed back by a large swath of time, right? So it might be, 6 months from the actual scheduled release date, and for some things, far longer. So in terms of the early development, you can get that done pretty quickly, but in terms of really fine-tuning everything and getting everything to do what you would like it to do, and really to complete the vision, and even sometimes evolve your own initial vision, it takes some extra time, and you can't guarantee anything in terms of the schedule meeting the deadlines that you would like to impose upon yourself, correct?
Correct. Here at Bitsapphire, we've had quite some experience with that on different projects. And the only reason why we're actually able to actually produce the PeerTracks web application in time for the conference, because we talked about this in the forum for the last 2 or 3 months, I think, was one, because of the experience, and two, because it wasn't rocket science. Right? It's a music application, and the nice thing is that it connects up to a blockchain, and the blockchain interface with that we already had quite some experience, so there was no learning curve for us on that specific, on those specifics, and therefore I think this is probably the project we were the most precise on with our estimates. However, when you do blockchains, there's just so many question marks out there, right? You're literally on the bleeding edge at the moment whenever you do anything. Therefore, for version 1, which is going to be the actual blockchain with delegates and all, we're actually we're forking Bitshares, obviously, changing several variables, taking out a lot of the code, adding some other transaction operations in there. I'm not going to go any further into what exactly, but that's going to be more than sufficient for version 1 and for the payment and discovery mechanism we've discovered. Later on, there's tons of other things we'll add, but those additions will also depend on the general market of blockchains out there, right? We're not doing this in a vacuum, in an empty chamber, a vacuum, or whatever you call it. There's several other blockchain-related projects out there, and almost every day I'm reading another research paper, which think, oh my God, wouldn't this be able to integrate this into music? But we need to prioritize what to actually include in what roadmap. And therefore, we're shooting version 1, which is pretty predictable. Then the further away you go, the less predictable it gets, right? So I can already tell you that version 2 or 3, which is going to be just an upgrade to the blockchain, is probably going to be incredible, awesome. At least, we're all excited about it. Version 1 is going to be very familiar to anybody with Bitshares, plus a lot of music-specific transaction operations.
You also mentioned that you're reading a lot of papers out there that you're interested in potentially integrating a lot of different things in. Do you see any of these white papers out there that you're reading as being stuff that could possibly be integrated into Bitshares itself?
So now I'm not talking in the name of PeerTracks or music. This is, just what we do at Bitsapphire and some stuff we test and think about internally. I'm just really want to stress this point so nobody thinks we're going to go out there and do this for music immediately. We might end up deciding that it's not the right decision for music. So one of the things is that currently with DPoS and really any blockchain, if anybody has had the chance to read Vitalik's blog about objectivity and subjectivity attacks, that's probably the number one thing that any blockchain will need to think about in the future. I won't get into the technical details. However, what the subjectivity essentially means is who actually decides what the true state of the blockchain is, right? If there's a fork happening, which fork is the right one? Traditional with Bitcoin, you would just say whichever has the more mining power, right? But what if it's an attack? The same thing applies to DPoS. You say whichever has 51% of the delegates. But we've had cases, I think at least one fork in the past, where the majority of the delegates were actually on the wrong fork, in a sense. we upgraded and there was an incompatibility, and we had to roll back. So and then there's the clients. Whom do the clients trust? You have a wallet somewhere. To which blockchain do you actually listen to? Is it fork A or B or C or whatever? And we think that this is the future potential solution, is by having the business logic of the blockchain itself, meaning how the state transition from block A to block B happens, which is currently being implemented by the delegates or the miners in mining, proof of work. The business logic of the state transition shouldn't actually be left up to the delegates or the miners. It should be a contract in and of itself in the Genesis block of the blockchain. And that contract itself should be able to be modified via votes by the clients, meaning by the shareholders themselves. And there's 1 or 2 papers currently out there, people experimenting with this, thinking about it. And it's pretty much perfect for Bitshares, because at that point, the delegates, if you think about it, they're both legislative and executives. If you think about it, there's sometimes this, they say it's like a parliament. No, it's like a set of ministries and whatever. They're both at the moment. You need to vote for a delegate in order to tell the network which business logic for the state transition you want. On what fork do you want to be? But if you put that into a Genesis block contract and the shareholders vote on it, then you can sync up the blockchain itself, the contract of the blockchain, with the clients, and the clients can have a copy of that because it can be pretty tiny. And therefore, the clients themselves can independently verify whether they're listening into the right blockchain. So at that point, it becomes total subjectivity, where the clients actually decide which blockchain is the right one. And the clients also know to which blockchain the majority of the clients listen to, because that is based on the vote on the Genesis contract itself. And the delegates then become really just like executives, right? The executive branch, they become like public utilities. They just sign blocks. And then even a 51% attack wouldn't really be a big deal. Then you probably get into a different problem where attacks on the wallets and the clients become a problem. But that can be solved in different ways. And that would be probably an incredible, useful upgrade to Bitshares and DPoS related forks themselves. And that's probably going to be the future. I mean, if Dan and the team won't implement it, we'll probably do it at some point over the next year. Not necessarily for music, but for DPoS overall.
That's absolutely beautiful. I mean, because I've myself been kicking that around, and I've seen the subjectivity versus the subjectivity white paper, but I didn't really read over it too much, to be completely honest with you. But it was a thought in my mind, in terms of the politics of the system, right? Because this delegated proof of stake, what really is beautiful to me about it is it puts power into the hands of people, right? And it recognizes the value of people to make the decisions to move the chain forward, as opposed to it all being completely algorithmic. So it's really interesting to see that there's kind of like a separation of powers, essentially, is what you're saying.
But the subjectivity, I mean, blockchains are always the manifestation of a social contract. And the social contract happens between subjectivities. That can be between people, or it can be between companies or governments or any mix out there. In the case of proof of work, a social contract between the miners, and that's it. And with DPoS, you can design it, and especially if you add this new, Genesis block contract style approach, you can literally create a social contract between any kinds of entities out there, right? So it could be between industries, between companies, between people, NGOs, whatever. Even if your government can't execute a contract correctly, as long as it can happen on the blockchain and you can participate in one, you could essentially replace contract execution government.
Well, let's not say that too loud. Not yet.
Well, this is especially fascinating for interjurisdictionary. I think essentially contracts which happen between jurisdictions, between countries, right? So to give you an example, so we're based in Kosovo and southeastern Europe. It's a tiny country of, I think, less than 2 million people. And the only trade agreements we have with is, I think, the EU, US, and China, or something like that. So therefore, when I do business with the PeerTrax guys, I can have a trade agreement, and we can decide on where those contracts are executed. Who can actually decide whether the contract was broken or not, etc. And therefore, business becomes possible. But if I wanted to do something with the Philippines or Vietnam or anything, there's no trade agreement. There's nothing between the two governments which essentially do the business logic of the state transition of their constitution, because it's all the same thing. We can't agree on that. However, if there's a blockchain and the contract can be executed fully on the blockchain, even if it's just between us two companies, then that solves the problem, as long as it's all contained within the blockchain. The moment you have something that depends on stuff external to the blockchain, that's when it gets tricky.
Sure. So there's actually, the logic is going to enable you to really customize how you interact with different people in different jurisdictions, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'll go back now to JRAN. I'm sorry, JRAN. Number 2, what will be open source about music, and what will not be open source? Can you please tell us where we can follow development of the open source aspects?
The blockchain will be 100% open source. It's either going to be MIT licensed or unlicensed. That's still to be decided. Because we're in this specific industry, there's always the risk of a centralized company just taking up the tech and doing a centralized solution with the same stuff, right? And we're looking into ways how to circumvent that and how to assure that that's not going to happen. We have a lot of ideas, but at this point, I can't really disclose how we're thinking about that. How that.
Sure.
So that's one thing. The blockchain will be open. The blockchain can be followed and will be open source within the next few weeks. That's probably going to happen. So it's going to be pushed to an open source GitHub repository, just like Bitshares is, within the next few weeks, probably the same day the announcements happen. Bitshares itself is going to be closed source. However, the blockchain reader, the wrapper, is going to be open source.
The wrapper is going to be open source. What do you mean by that?
So you essentially, the way you access the blockchain, that's going, it's like, I think in Bitshares, it's what generates the RPC calls, which deserializes the blockchain and creates JSON calls through which then the wallet can interact with. And that's like a middle layer that will be fully open source.
Sure. Okay.
Right. So in the future, other applications can come up with and interact with the blockchain without having to reinvent their deserializer.
Sure. They can just use that, which will make it easier to integrate into this blockchain, essentially.
A lot, yes.
So the third question that JRAN asks here is, how many full-time developers are working 100% of their time on the music project?
On the blockchain, it's currently 3. There's going to become 4. And on PeerTrax, they were 6 plus 1 designer. And now that PeerTrax is done, one of them will switch over, and then it's going to be 4.
We're going to be gaining one.
On the music, on the blockchain.
So Mr. Jeans, I'll go ahead and go next into some of his questions here. So questions 1 and 3 above, he's going to ask kind of from JRAN's questions. What functions will version 1 of the blockchain have? Which you pretty much answered some of that. Is there, and I'll go ahead and say that it's going to resemble a lot, pretty much like Bitshares blockchain, essentially, from what you said. Is there anything you'd like to add on to that or correct?
So one key aspect of the Bitshares blockchain is going to be taken out because, one, we don't want to compete with the Bitshares blockchain. We want to add value in a different aspect. I'm not sure whether I can disclose it at this point. I really want to talk.
Sure, and don't feel obligated to do so. Yeah. This is the thing. You're going to have other Hangouts. So if this is not the time to do so, it's probably better not to. There's a time to talk and there's a time for us to be hush. Yeah. So it's fine.
That's no problem, but people really want to know, and at least they can know the general direction. And then we discovered a fascinating mechanism that makes it possible for a certain set of artists to make to increase their income a lot through the Bitshares Music blockchain, and a certain set of artists to get discovered almost instantly. And that is possible through a combination of a specific new transaction type, a transaction operation, and through something that happens on the peer track side but can be replicated by any service in the future. So you essentially do two things with the same mechanism. Right? We're looking into how to protect that mechanism so, I don't know, iTunes, Spotify, Microsoft, whatever out there won't just copy it and do a centralized version of it. Right? And that's why I can't disclose too much of it.
I'm going to go ahead and piggyback on that because this has been something that I've really been thinking about a lot myself. And we've talked about it a little bit offline regarding the differences between centralized and decentralized blockchains. And I've been really questioning, and I don't know where you stand on it, what you think about it, but I would like to hear your thoughts on it in terms of, you mentioned, there's a kind of a concern that you have to, and it's a legitimate concern in my mind, that you have to kind of protect what you're doing because there's a very real risk that some huge conglomerate who can hire 1,000 developers at the drop of a hat to work on whatever they want to will come out and just kind of steal away whatever you've done and try to compete with a centralized blockchain. And I recently heard something about IBM trying to have their own BitUSD. What do you think is the selling point for users to not use that blockchain, that BitUSD, as opposed to Bitshares BitUSD, or in terms of maybe with music, if a centralized institution wants to take this, is there anything that is going to, in your mind, push users more toward the decentralized chain as opposed to the centralized chain, or vice versa?
So this is purely my opinion and something about music or so. But all projects we do internally, we kind of bet on these opinions. So we put our money where our mouth is. We've wrestled with the thought of what the added value of blockchains is, because almost every single week we get a company or startup requesting either consulting or just talking with us or working with us, and they all say, I have this great idea and I want to build it in a blockchain, or I want to build it on top of a blockchain, whatever. And the number one question we ask is, why do you need a blockchain for that? It sounds awesome, and blockchain's awesome, etc. But why would you want to do that on a blockchain, in a blockchain? So we were confronted early on with the question of what the heck is added value of a blockchain in the first place, right? And therefore, what type of business logic and added value can happen on a blockchain? We needed that for internal business purposes and other stuff, and we got to the conclusion that the single added value of a blockchain, the absolutely only added value of a blockchain, assuming that it is distributed and there's consensus involved, because you can also do centralized blockchains without distribution, without consensus. Assuming that the added value is really just lower counterparty. It sounds ridiculously simple, but we really think that's the only thing. If you have a database which is centralized and which only one subject controls, like a company, a person, whatever, then the state transition, the correct state transition of the database, the correct execution of contracts, the correct sending funds from one place to another, i.e. PayPal, i.e. whatever, is fully at the mercy of that subject. And therefore, the more centralized it gets, the higher the counterparty risk of the state happening the way it's. And the less centralized it is, the lower the counterparty risk. Assuming that so there's two kinds of decentralization. There's the technical decentralization and there's the political one. The political one is several subjects, getting to a social consensus, a social contract, and creating the blockchain. A technical one would be one private entity holding the private keys to the business contract and essentially controlling the entire state transition, and delegates just executing that and making money, and therefore that would be just a technical distribution, decentralization. So assuming the political one, the more heterogeneous the subjects which take part in the decision of the state transition, in the politics of it, the lower the counterparty risk of the state transition itself. And, which is even more interesting, the counterparty risk actually decreases logarithmically, right? So that also means that there's probably some sort of maximum political decentralization that makes sense in a free market, which is probably somewhere between 65 and 257 nodes participating. I think Bytemaster actually had a similar blog about that, getting to similar conclusions. So if you look just at counterparty risk, that's it. Whenever there is subjects, people, companies not trusting one another or being in a prisoner's dilemma where it makes sense for them to chicken out and not take part, that's pretty much what the blockchain can solve, as long as the contract can be executed fully on the blockchain without the need for external interaction. And that's probably where distributed consensus politics-based blockchains are going to flourish, while the majority of blockchains, meaning just immutable state transition databases, they are probably going to be mostly used in existing industries in a centralized manner. Sure.
Well, and it's very interesting to. I mean, this is the kind of question that we have to be asking, right? There are reasons for using blockchains for a centralized business, like you said here. It definitely does decrease some of the risk on that end, but one of the big things and one of the big reasons why blockchain technology originally flourished was largely because of well, to a degree, both of them, the political and the technical aspects of it, the technical decentralization. But there's something really to be said about the political aspect, right?
The political aspect is the important part. So we talked to a huge financial institution in the US at one point, and they are all talking about blockchains at the moment. I can already tell you that. Everybody says, what can we do with this blockchain thing? Ironically enough, they don't know the difference between Bitcoin and blockchains, and they just say, let's do something with Bitcoin. And what they really mean is blockchains. And what they never like is the political decentralization.
So you were saying, let me get this straight, that governments are not too keen on the idea of political decentralization?
Absolutely, because that's their job. A government is a state transition machine. Company is a state transition machine. An institution, just as well. Institutions are state transition machines, and the blockchain is the same thing, literally. The difference between governments, institutions, companies, and the blockchain well, in the case of the government can also enforce contracts outside of its own state, kind of like outside of its own blockchain, through force. But a blockchain can't do that. Company does its contract can be executed by force by the government, right? This is the monopoly of potential violence. This is probably also the true innovation and the actual, this is completely hypothetical, but I think this is actually why capitalism worked in Britain and parts of Europe, because first time state transition wasn't bound also by the violence of the institution creating it. Rather now, when the government had the monopoly on violence and said, you know what, you can do whatever contracts you want, we will enforce them as long as they're okay with our constitution, which is kind of like the Genesis block contract.
Sure.
Then they do that enforcement and therefore lower the counterparty risk of each contract being executed, and made it possible for contract innovation. And that was when companies were created and NGOs were created and formal, even religions and whatnot were created. That's when marriage became a contract, right? Before it wasn't. And that was probably why in some developing countries, you don't see that much development until contracts get executed properly by the government. Or China, where you know that once you get to a certain size, your contract is being treated differently from everybody else's contracts. Anyway, I'm drifting off, but what the governments want, they need the monopoly on state transition. It sounds really abstract, but they really need it, because otherwise they're left only with state transitions where violence or the threat of violence is required. And ironically enough, that's probably every single time property is involved, because property, in my opinion, is a completely artificial concept, and which, ironically enough, cannot exist without potentially by violence enforceable state transition. Right? Property is a social contract, and if everybody enforces their own violence, then we're in chaos, or almost, and everybody surrenders to somebody, a government or whatever. And whatever the government, and that's actual property. But if I think you can buy land on the moon, and you can say that that's your property, but is that really your property? If somebody else bought the same thing, it's not enforceable. And therefore, the line between what's property and what's not is actually drawn by the potential violence of the government. Right? That's probably a bit counter to much of what the Austrian people in the forum think of property.
Well, it's very interesting to hear your opinions on it, and these are things that we're all discovering and kind of questioning ourselves as we move forward, and we're kind of in a state of flux where we're all asking all these questions, and we're kind of moving toward the resolution and trying to figure out exactly what we think about this stuff. So it's interesting to hear kind of the other side of it, because Bytemaster is very Austrian in his way of thinking, generally speaking. That would kind of bring me into you mentioned, and there's a reason. It's very interesting because you said that you're kind of getting off of topic with this, but it's actually a question that I wanted to ask you. Bitshares early on recognized the power of Bitshares vote, right? Do you foresee the value of implementing something like voting features into the music blockchain in the future?
It depends how it's implemented. So if, for example, you implement it through gateways, so there's a government that just certifies specific public key on the blockchain as being, as belonging to an actual real person, and then when votes are cast, a specific contract just takes into account the votes from the certified from the certified public keys as by that specific gateway, then it's one possibility, but I'm not sure how that would work for Bitshares Music, though, at least at this point. Or, I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff where you can do distributed identity verification. Say, let's not, we shouldn't do identity verification at all. Let's just do a prediction market. There's tons of ways you could do it potentially.
Yeah, and what really had got me thinking about it was some of the ladies, especially in my family, are very keen on things like The Voice and what's the other one? America's Got Talent, and those types of things where the audience can vote. So basically, on which artist is going to stay this round or not. And it was kind of interesting to me as I've been kind of thinking about music and the broad uses of it in our society and how this is all going to unfold. I've found myself thinking, this almost seems, those shows almost seem like attempts at kind of decentralizing to a degree some of the talent finding of, of the next big star in music. And they utilize voting to a degree, but it's, I guess it would be more, maybe not voting so much as polling would be a better word for it.
Well, in music, the special transaction type and the mechanism we invented, that solves it quite nicely without the need for voting, right? And simulations are very missing.
Mr. Jeans asks one more question here. Which versions of music which version of music will artists be able to launch artist coins in? So I guess the question is, will Vietnam, you're muted, just in case you're talking.
I'm not talking, it's just version 1 onwards. Immediately on version 1, you'll be able to create artist coins.
Oh, okay. So there you go, Joey. You can start creating your artist coins today. Thank you, everybody, for coming here and attending today.